Welcome to the Bannered Mare. Today we will be reading the Septology of a Dance in Fire. A Dance in Fire, Chapter 1, by Wowhen Yarth. Scene: the Imperial City, Cyrodiil. Date: 7th Frostfall, 3rd Era, 397. It seemed as if the palace had always housed the Atreus Building Commission, the company of clerks and estate agents who authored and notarized nearly every construction of any note in the empire. It had stood for 250 years since the reign of Emperor Magnus. A plain fronted an austere hall on a minor but respectable plaza in the Imperial City. Energetic and ambitious, middle-class lads and ladies worked there, as well as complacent middle-aged ones like Decumus Scotti. No one could imagine a world without the commission, least of all Scotti. To be accurate, he could not imagine a world without himself in the commission. Lord Atreus is perfectly aware of your contributions, said the managing clerk, closing the shutter that demarcated Scotty's office behind him. But you know that things have been difficult. Yes, said Scotti stiffly. Lord Vannick's men have been giving us a lot of competition lately, and we must be more efficient if we are to survive. Unfortunately, that means releasing some of our historically best but presently underachieving senior clerks. I understand. Can't be helped. I'm glad that you understand, smiled the managing clerk, smiling thinly and withdrawing. Please have your room cleared immediately. Scotti began the task of organizing all his work to pass on to his successor. It would probably be young Imbralius who would take most of it on, which was as it should be, he considered philosophically. The lad knew how to find business. Scotti wondered idly what the fellow would do with the contracts for the new statue of St. Alicia for which the Temple of the One had applied. Probably invent a clerical error, blame it on his old predecessor, Decumus Scotti, and require an additional cost to rectify. I have correspondence for Decumus Scotti of the Atreus Building Commission. Scotti looked up. A fat-faced courier had entered his office and was thrusting forth a sealed scroll. He handed the boy a gold piece and opened it up. By the poor penmanship, atrocious spelling and grammar, and overall unprofessional tone, it was manifestly evident who the writer was. Laertes Eurus, a fellow clerk some years before, who had left the commission after being accused of unethical business practices. Dear Scotti, I imagine you always wonder what happened to me, and the last place you would have expected to find me is out in the woods. But that's exactly where I am. Haha. If you're smart and want to make a lot of extra gold for Lord Atreus and yourself, you'll come down to Valenwood too. If you haven't or have been following the politics here lately, you may or may not know that there's been a war between the Boschmer and their neighbors elsewhere over the past 2 years. Things have only just calmed down, and there's a lot that needs to be rebuilt. Now I've got more business than I can handle, but I need some with some clout, someone representing a respected agency to get the quill and the ink. That someone is you, my fiend. Come and meet me at Mother Pasca's Tavern in Fallenesti, Valenwood. I'll be here 2 weeks, and you won't be sorry. Eurus. P.S. Bring a wagon load of timber if you can. What do you have there, Scotti? Asked a voice. Scotti started. It was Imbralius, his damnably handsome face peeking through the shutters, smiling in that way that melted the hearts of the stingiest of patrons and the roughest of stonemasons. Scotti shoved the letter in his jacket pocket. Personal correspondence, he sniffed. I'll be cleared up here in just a moment. I don't want to hurry you, he said, Imbralius, grabbing a few sheets of blank contracts from Scotti's desk. I've just gone through a stack and the junior scribe's hands are all cramping up, so I thought you wouldn't miss a few. The lad vanished. Scotti retrieved the letter and read it again. He thought about his life, something he rarely did. It seemed a sea of gray with a black insurmountable wall looming. There was only one narrow passage he could see in that wall. quickly, before he had a moment to reconsider it, he grabbed a dozen of the blank contracts with the shimmering gold leaf, Atreus Building Commission by appointment of His Imperial Majesty, and hid them in the satchel with his personal effects. The next day he began his adventure with a giddy lack of hesitation. He arranged for a seat in a caravan bound for Valenwood, the single escorted conveyance to the southeast leaving the Imperial City that week. He had scarcely hours to pack, but he remembered to purchase a wagon load of timber. "It'll be extra gold to pay for the horse to pull that," frowned the convoy head. "So I anticipated," smiled Scotti with his best Imbralius grin. 10 wagons and all set off that afternoon through the familiar Cyrodiilic countryside, past fields of wildflowers, gently rolling woodlands, friendly hamlets. The clap of the horses' hooves against the soundstone road reminded Scotti that the Atreus Building Commission constructed it. 5 of the 18 necessary contracts for its completion were drafted by his own hand. "Very smart for you to bring that wood along," said a gray-whiskered Breton man next to him on his wagon. "You must be in commerce." "Of a sort," said Scotti, in a way he hoped was mysterious, before introducing himself. "Decumus Scotti." "Griff Malin," said the man. "I'm a poet, actually, a translator of old Bosmer literature. I was researching some newly discovered tracks of the Minoriad play bar 2 years ago, when the war broke out and I had to leave. You are no doubt familiar with the Minoriad if you're aware of the Green Pact." Scotti thought the man might be speaking perfect gibberish, but he nodded his head. "Naturally. I don't pretend that the Minoriad is renowned as the Aeliadion, or as ancient as the Dancer Gaul, but I think it has remarkable significance to understanding the nature of the Merolithic Bosmer mind. The origin of the wood elf aversion to cutting their own wood or eating any plant material at all, yet paradoxically their willingness to import plant stuff from other cultures, I feel can be linked to a passage in the Minoriad." Malin shuffled through some of his papers, searching for the appropriate text. To Scotty's vast relief, the carriage soon stopped to camp for the night. They were high on a bluff over a gray stream, and before them was the great valley of Valenwood. Only the cry of seabirds declared the presence of the ocean to the bay to the west. Here the timber was so tall and wide, twisting around itself like an impossible knot begun eons ago to be impenetrable. A few more modest trees, only 50 feet to the lowest branches, stood on the cliff at the edge of camp. The sight was so alien to Scotti, and he found himself so anxious about the proposition of entering the wilderness that he could not imagine sleeping. Fortunately, Malin had supposed he had found another academic with a passion for riddles of ancient cultures. Long into the night, he recited Bosmer verse in the original and in his own translation, sobbing and bellowing and whispering wherever appropriate. Gradually, Scotti began to feel drowsy, but a sudden crack of wood snapping made him sit straight up. "What was that?" Malin smiled. "I like it too. Convocation in the malignity of the moonless speculum, a dance of fire. There are some enormous birds up in the trees moving around," whispered Scotti, pointing in the direction of the dark shapes above. "I wouldn't worry about that," said Malin, irritated with his audience. "Now listen to how the poet characterizes Hermamora's invocation in the 18th stanza of the 4th book. The dark shapes in the trees were some of them perched like birds, others slithered like snakes, and still others stood up straight like men." As Malin recited his verse, Scotti watched the figures softly leap from branch to branch, half gliding across impossible distances for anything without wings. They gathered in groups and then reorganized until they had spread to every tree around the camp. Suddenly they plummeted from the heights. "Mara," cried Scotti, "they're falling like rain." "Probably seed pods," Malin shrugged, not turning around. "Some of the trees have remarkable—" The camp erupted into chaos. Fires burst out in the wagons. The horses wailed from mortal blows. Casks of wine, fresh water, and liquor gushed their contents to the ground. A nimble shadow dashed past Scotti and Malin, gathering sacks of grain and gold with impossible agility and grace. Scotti had only one glance at it, lit up by a sudden nearby burst of flame. It was a sleek creature with pointed ears, wide yellow eyes, mottled pied fur, and a tail like a whip. "Werewolf," he whimpered, shrinking back. "Cathay rot," groaned Malin. "Much worse. Khajiit cousins or some such thing come to plunder." "Are you sure?" As quickly as they struck, the creatures retreated, diving off the bluff before the battle-magen knight, the caravan's escorts, had fully opened their eyes. Malin and Scotti ran to the precipice and saw 100 feet below the tiny figures dash out of the water, shake themselves, and disappear into the wood. Werewolves aren't acrobats like that, said Malin. They were definitely Cathayrot. Bastard thieves. They extend our didn't realize the value of my notebooks. It wasn't a complete loss. A Dance in Fire, Chapter 2, by Wow and Yarth. It was a complete loss. The Cathayrot had stolen or destroyed almost every item of value in the caravan in just a few minutes' time. Decumus Scotti's wagon load of wood he had hoped to trade with the Bosmer had been set on fire and then toppled off the bluff. His clothing and contracts were tattered and ground into the mud of dirt mixed with spilt wine. All the pilgrims, merchants, and adventurers in the group moaned and wept as they gathered the remnants of their belongings by the rising sun of the dawn. I best not tell anyone that I managed to hold on to my notes for my translation of the Minoriad Playbar, whispered the poet Griff Malin. They'd probably turn on me. Scotti politely declined the opportunity of telling Malin just how little value he himself placed on the man's property. Instead, he counted the coins in his purse, 34 gold pieces. Very little indeed for an entrepreneur beginning a new business. Hoy, came a cry from the wood. A small party of Bosmer emerged from the thicket, clad in leather mail and bearing arms. Friend or foe? Neither, growled the convoy head. You must be the Cyrodiils, laughed the leader of the group, a tall, skeleton-thin youth with a sharp, vulpine face. We heard you were en route. Evidently, so did our enemies. I thought the war was over, muttered one of the caravan's now ruined merchants. The Bosmer laughed again. No act of war, just a little border enterprise. You are going on to Falinesti? I'm not, the convoy head shook his head. As far as I'm concerned, my duty is done. No more horses, no more caravan. Just a fat profit lost to me. The men and women crowded around the man, protesting, threatening, begging, but he refused to step foot in Valenwood. If these were the new times of peace, he said, he'd rather come back for the next war. Scotti tried a different route and approached the Bosmer. He spoke with an authoritative but friendly voice, the kind he used in negotiations with peevish carpenters. I don't suppose you'd consider escorting me to Falinesti. I'm a representative for an important imperial agency, the Atreus Building Commission, here to help repair and alleviate some of the problems the war with the Khajiit brought to your province. Patriotism, 20 gold pieces, and you must carry your own gear if you have any left, replied the Bosmer. Scotti reflected the negotiations with peevish carpenters rarely went his way either. 6 eager people had enough gold on them for payment. Among those without funds was the poet who appealed to Scotti for assistance. I'm sorry, Griff, I only have 14 gold left over. Not even enough for a decent room when I get to Falinesti. I really would help you if I could, said Scotti, persuading himself that it was true. The band of 6 and their Bosmer escorts began the descent down a rocky path along the bluff. Within an hour's time, they were deep in the jungles of Valenwood, a never-ending canopy of hues of browns and greens obscured the sky. A millennium's worth of fallen leaves formed a deep, wormy sea of putrefaction beneath their feet. Several miles were crossed wading through the slime. For several more, they took a labyrinthian path across fallen branches and the low-hanging boughs of giant trees. All the while, hour after hour, the inexhaustible Bosmer host moved so fast the Cyrodiils struggled to keep from being left behind. A red-faced little merchant with short legs took a bad step on a rotten branch and nearly fell. His fellow provincials had to help him up. The Bosmer paused only a moment, their eyes continually darting to the shadows in the trees above before moving on at their usual expeditious pace. What are they so nervous about? Wheezed the merchant irritably. More Cathayrot? Don't be ridiculous, laughed the Bosmer unconvincingly. Khajiit this far into Valenwood? In times of peace, they'd never dare. When the group passed high enough above the swamp that the smell was somewhat dissipated, Scotti felt a sudden pang of hunger. He was used to 4 meals a day in the Cyrodiilic custom. Hours of non-stop exertion without food was not part of his regimen as a comfortably paid clerk. He pondered, feeling somewhat delirious, how long they had been trotting through the jungle. 12 hours? 20? A week. Time was meaningless. Sunlight was only sporadic through the vegetative ceiling. Phosphorescent molds on the trees and in the muck below provided the only regular illumination. Is it at all possible for us to rest and eat? He hollered to his host up ahead. We're near to Falinesti, came the echoing reply. Lots of food there. The path continued upward for several hours more across a clod of fallen logs, rising up to the first and then the second boughs of the tree line. As they rounded a long corner, the travelers found themselves midway up a waterfall that fell 100 feet or more. No one had the energy to complain as they began pulling up the stacks of rock, agonizing foot by foot. The Bosmer escorts disappeared into the mist, but Scotti kept climbing until there was no more rock left. He wiped the sweat and river water from his eyes. Falinesti spread across the horizon before him. Sprawling across both banks of the river stood the mighty Grot Oak City, with groves and orchards of lesser trees crowding it like supplicants before their king. At a lesser scale, the tree that formed the moving city would have been extraordinary, gnarled and twisted with a gorgeous crown of golden green, dripping with vines and shining with sap. At a mile tall and half as wide, it was the most magnificent thing Scotti had ever seen. If he had not been a starving man with the soul of a clerk, he would have sung. There you are, said the leader of the escorts. Not too far a walk. You should be glad it's wintertide. In summertide, the city's on the far south end of the province. Scotti was lost as to how to proceed. The side of the vertical metropolis where people moved about like ants disoriented all his sensibilities. You wouldn't know of an inn called... He paused for a moment, and then pulled out Eurus's letter from his pocket. Something like Mother Pasco's Tavern. Mother Pascost? The lead Bosmer laughed his familiar, contemptuous laugh. You won't want to stay there. Visitors always prefer the Asia Hall in the top bows. It's expensive, but very nice. I'm meeting someone at Mother Pascost's Tavern. If you've made up your mind to go, take a lift to Havel Slump and ask for directions there. Just don't get lost and fall asleep in the Western Cross. This apparently struck the youth's friends as a very witty jest, and so it was their laughter echoing behind him that Scotti crossed the writhing root system to the base of Falinesti. The ground was littered with leaves and refuse, and from moment to moment a glass or a bone would plummet from far above, so he walked with his neck crooked to have warning. An intricate network of platforms anchored to thick vines slipped up and down the slick trunk of the city with perfect grace, manned by operators with arms as thick as an ox's belly. Scotti approaches the nearest fellow at one of the platforms, who was idly smoking from a glass pipe. I was wondering if you might take me to Havel Slump. The Mer nodded, and within a few minutes' time, Scotti was 200 feet in the air at a crook between two mighty branches. Curled webs of moss stretched unevenly across the fork, forming a shared roof for several dozen small buildings. There were only a few souls in the alley, but around the bend ahead he could hear the sound of music and people. Scotti tipped the Falinesti platform ferryman a gold piece and asked for the location of Mother Pascost's Tavern. Straight ahead of you, sir, but you won't find anyone there, the ferryman explained, pointing in the direction of the noise. Morndas, everyone in Havel Slump has revelry. Scotti walked carefully along the narrow street. Though the ground felt as solid as the marble avenues of the imperial city, there were slit cracks in the bark that exposed fatal drops into the river. He took a moment to sit down, to rest, and get used to the view from the heights. It was a beautiful day for certain, but it took Scotti only a few minutes of contemplation to rise up in alarm. A jolly little raft anchored downstream below him had distinctly moved several inches while he watched it, but it hadn't moved at all. He had, together with everything around him. It was no metaphor. The city of Falinesti walked, and, considered its size, it moved quickly. Scotti rose to his feet and into a cloud of smoke that drifted out from around the bend. It was the most delicious roast he had ever smelled. The clerk forgot his fear and ran. The revelry, as the ferryman had termed it, took place on an enormous platform tied to the tree, wide enough to be a plaza in any other city. A fantastic assortment of the most amazing people Scotti had ever seen were jammed shoulder to shoulder together, many eating, many more drinking, and some dancing to a lutist and singer perched on an offshoot above the crowd. They were largely Bosmer, true natives clad in colorful leather and bones, with a close minority of orcs. Whirling through the throng, dancing and bellowing at one another were a hideous ape people. A few heads bobbing over the top of the crowd belonged not, as Scotti first assumed, to very tall people, but to a family of centaurs. Care for some mutton? Queried a wizened old Mer who roasted an enormous beast on some red-hot rocks. Scotti quickly paid him a gold piece and devoured the leg he was given, and then another gold piece, then another leg. The fellow chuckled when Scotti began choking on a piece of gristle and handed him a mug of frothing white drink. He drank it, and felt a quiver run through his body as if he were being tickled. "What is that?" Scotti asked. "Jäger. Fermented pig's milk. I can let you have a flagon of it and a bit more mutton for another gold. Scotti agreed, paid, gobbled down the meat, and took the flagon with him as he slipped into the crowd. His co-worker Laertes Eurus, the man who had told him to come to Valenwood, was nowhere to be seen. When the flagon was a quarter empty, Scotti stopped looking for Eurus. When it was half empty, he was dancing with the group, oblivious to the broken planks and gaps in the fencework. At 3/4 empty, he was trading jokes with a group of creatures whose language was completely alien to him. By the time the flagon was completely drained, he was asleep, snoring while the revelry continued all around his supine body. The next morning, still asleep, Scotti had the sensation of someone kissing him. He made a face to return the favor, but a pain like fire spread through his chest and forced him to open his eyes. There was an insect the size of a large calf sitting on him, crushing him, its spiky legs holding him down while a central spiral-bladed vortex of a mouth tore through his shirt. He screamed and thrashed, but the beast was too strong. It had found its meal and it was going to finish it. It's over, thought Scotti wildly. I should have never left home. I could have stayed in the city and perhaps found work with Lord Vanek. I could have begun again as a junior clerk and worked my way back up. Suddenly, the mouth released itself. The creature shivered once, expelled a burst of yellow bile, and died. Got one, cried a voice, not too distantly. For a moment, Scotti lay still. His head throbbed and his chest burned. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement. Another of the horrible monsters was scurried towards him. He scrambled, trying to push himself free, but before he could come out, there was a sound of a bow cracking and an arrow pierced the second insect. Good shot, cried another voice. Get the first one again. I just saw him move a little. This time, Scotti felt the impact of the bolt hit the carcass. He cried out, but he could hear how muffled his voice was by the beetle's body. Cautiously, he tried sliding a foot out and rolling under, but the movement apparently had the effect of convincing the archers that the creature still lived. A volley of arrows was launched forth. Now the beast was sufficiently perforated so pools of its blood, and likely the blood of its victims, began to seep out onto Scotti's body. When Scotti was a lad, before he grew too sophisticated for such sports, he had often gone to the imperial arena for the competitions of war. He recalled a great veteran of the fights when asked, telling him his secret. Whenever I'm in doubt of what to do, I have a shield. I stay behind it. Scotti followed that advice. After an hour, when he no longer heard arrows being fired, he threw aside the remains of the bug and leapt as quickly as he could to stand. It was not a moment too soon. A gang of 8 archers had their bows pointing in his direction, ready to fire. When they saw him, they laughed. Didn't anyone ever tell you not to sleep in the Western Cross? How are we going to exterminate all the horrors if you drunks keep feeding them? Scotti shook his head and walked back along the platform, round the bend to Havelsump. He was bloodied and torn and tired, and he had far too much fermented pig's milk. All he wanted was a proper place to lie down. He stepped into Mother Pasket's tavern, a dank place, wet with sap, smelling of mildew. My name is Decumus Scotti, he said. I was hoping you have someone named Eurus staying here. Decumus Scotti, pondered the fleshy proprietress. Mother Paskost herself. I've heard that name. Oh, you must be the fellow he left the note for. Let me go see if I can find it. A Dance in Fire, Chapter 3, by Wowhen Yarth. Mother Paskost disappeared into the sordid hole that was her tavern and emerged a moment later with a scrap of paper with Laertes Eurus's familiar scrawl. Decumus Scotti held it up before a patch of sunlight that had found its way through the massive boughs of the tree city and read, Scotti, so you made it to Falinesti, Valenwood. Congratulations. And read, Scotti, so you made it to Falinesti, Valenwood. Congratulations. I'm sure you had quite an adventure getting here. Unfortunately, I'm not here anymore, as you probably guess. There's a town downriver called Athiemat. Get a boat and join me. It's a deal. I hope you brought a lot of contracts, 'cause these people need a lot of building done. They were close to a war, you see, but not so close they don't have any money left to pay. Meet me down here as soon as you can. Eurus. So, Scotti pondered, Eurus had left Falinesti and gone to some place called Athie. Given his poor penmanship and ghastly spelling, it could equally well be Athie, Aphie, Authri, M3, Ortha, or Crackaback. The sensible thing to do, Scotti knew, was to call this adventure over and try to find some way to get back home to the Imperial City. He was no mercenary devoted to a life of thrills. He was, or at least had been, a senior clerk at a successful private building commission. Over the last few weeks, he had been robbed by the Cathay Rot, taken on a death march through the jungle by a gang of giggling Bosmeri, half-starved to death, drugged with fermented pig's milk, nearly slain by some kind of giant tick, and attacked by archers. He was filthy, exhausted, and had, he counted, 10 gold pieces to his name. Now the man whose proposal brought him to the depths of misery was not even there. It was both judicious and seemly to abandon the enterprise entirely. And yet a small but distinct voice in his head told him, "You have been chosen. You have no other choice but to see this through." Scotti turned to the stout old woman, Mother Pascost, who had been watching him curiously. "I was wondering if you knew of a village that was at the edge of the recent conflict with elsewhere. It's something like Athy?" "You must mean Athay," she grinned. "My middle lad, Viglil, he manages a dairy down there. Beautiful country right on the river. Is that where your friend went?" "Yes," said Scotti. "Do you know the fastest way to get there?" After a short conversation, and an even shorter ride to Falinesti's routes by way of the platforms, and a jog to the riverbank, Scotti was negotiating transport with a huge fair-haired Bosmer with a face like a pickled carp. He called himself back Captain Balfix, but even Scotti, with his sheltered life, could recognize him for what he was. A retired pirate for hire, a smuggler for certain, and probably much worse. His ship, which had clearly been stolen in the distant past, was a bent old imperial sloop. 50 gold and will be in Athay in 2 days' time," boomed Captain Balfix expansively. "I have 9 gold pieces," replied Scotti, and feeling the need for explanation, added, "I had 10, but I gave one to the platform ferryman to get me down here." "9 is just as fine," said the captain agreeably. "Truth be told, I was going to Athay, whether you paid me or not. Make yourself comfortable on the boat. We'll be leaving in just a few minutes." Decumus Scotti boarded the vessel, which sat low in the water of the river, stacked high with crates and sacks that spilled out of the hold and galley and onto the deck. Each was marked with stamps advertising the most innocuous substances: copper scraps, lard, ink, high rock meal marked for cattle, tar, fish, jelly. I think fish jelly is one word. Scotty's imagination reeled, picturing what sorts of illicit imports were truly aboard. It took more than those few minutes for Captain Balfix to haul in the rest of his cargo, but in an hour the anchor was up and they were sailing downriver towards Athay. The green-gray water barely rippled, only touched by the fingers of the breeze. Apologies. Lush plant life crowded the banks, obscuring from sight all the animals that sang and roared at one another. Lulled by the serene surroundings, Scotti drifted to sleep. At night he awoke and gratefully accepted some clean clothes and food from Captain Balfix. "Why are you going to Athay, if I may ask?" queried the Bosmer. "I'm meeting a former colleague there. He asked me to come down from the Imperial City where I worked for the Atreus Building Commission to negotiate some contracts." Scotti took another bite of the dried sausages they were sharing for dinner. "We're going to try to repair and refurbish whatever bridges, roads, and other structures that got damaged in the recent war with Khajiit." "It's been a hard 2 years," the captain nodded, "though I suppose good for me and the likes of you and your friend. Trade routes cut off. Now they think there's going to be war with the Somerset Isles. You heard that?" Scotti shook his head. "I've done my fair share of smuggling skooma down the coast, even helping some revolutionary types try to escape the Maine's wrath. But now the wars have made me a legitimate trader, a businessman. The first casualties of war is always the corrupted." Scotti said he was sorry to hear that, and they lapsed into silence, watching the stars and moon's reflection on the still water. The next day, Scotti awoke to find the captain wrapped up in a sail, torpid from alcohol, singing in a low, slurred voice. When he saw Scotti rise, he offered his flagon of Jaeger. "I've learned my lesson during revelry at the Western Cross." Captain laughed and then burst into tears. "I don't want to be legitimate. Other pirates I used to know are still raping and stealing and smuggling and selling nice folks like you into slavery. I swear to you, I never thought the first time that I ran a real shipment of legal goods that my life would turn out like this. Oh, I know I could go back to it, but Bondar knows after all I've seen. I'm a ruined man." Scotti helped the weeping Mur out of the sail, murmuring words of reassurance. Then he added, "Forgive me for changing subject, but where are we?" "Oh," moaned Captain Balfix miserably, "we make good time. Athay's right around the bend in the river." "Then it looks like Athay's on fire," said Scotti, pointing. A great plume of smoke, black as pitch, was rising above the trees as they drifted around the bend. They next saw the flames and then the blackened skeletal remains of the village. Dying, blazing villagers leapt from the rocks into the river. A cacophony of wailing met their ears, and they could see, roaming along the edges of town, the figures of Khajiiti soldiers bearing torches. "Bondar, bless me," slurred the captain. "The war's back on." "Oh no," whimpered Scotti. The sloop drifted with the current toward the opposite shore away from the fiery town. Scotti turned his attention there and the sanctuary it offered. Just a peaceful arbor away from the horror. There was a shudder of leaves in two of the trees, and a dozen lithe Khajiit dropped to the ground armed with bows. "They see us," says Scotti, "and they've got bows." "Well, of course they have bows," snarled Captain Balfix. Bosmer may have invented the bloody things, but we didn't think to keep them secret, you bloody bureaucrat. Now they're setting their arrows on fire. Yes, they do that sometimes. Captain, they're shooting at us. They're shooting at us with flaming arrows." So they are," the captain agreed. "The aim here is to avoid being hit." But hit they were, and very shortly thereafter. Even worse. The second volley of arrows hit the supply of pitch, which ignited in a tremendous blue blaze. Scotti grabbed Captain Balfix, and they left overboard just before the ship and all its cargo disintegrated. The shock of the cold water brought the Bosmer into temporary sobriety. He called to Scotti, who was already swimming as fast as he could toward the bend. "Master Decumus, where do you think you're swimming to?" "Back to Falinesti," cried Scotti. "It will take you days, and by the time you get there, everyone will know about the attack on Othay. They'll never let anyone they don't know in. The closest village downriver is Grenis. Maybe they'll give us shelter." Scotti swam back to the captain, and side by side they began paddling in the middle of the river past the burning residuum of the village. He thanked Mara that he had learned to swim. Many a Cyrodiil did not, as largely landlocked as the imperial province was. Had he been raised in mere Corp or Ardamon, he might have been doomed. But the imperial city itself was encircled by water, and every lad and lass there knew how to cross without a boat, even those who grew up to be clerks and not adventurers. Captain Balfix's sobriety faded as he grew used to the water's temperature. Even in wintertide, the Xylo River was fairly temperate, and after a fashion even comfortable. The Bosmer strokes were uneven, and he'd stray closer to Scotti and then further away, pushing ahead and then falling behind. Scotti looked to the shore to his right. The flames had caught the trees like tinder. Behind them was an inferno with which they were barely keeping pace. To the shore on their left all looked fair until he saw a tremble in the river reeds, and then what caused it? A pride of the largest cats he had ever seen. They were auburn-haired, green-eyed beasts with jaws and teeth to match his wildest nightmares, and they were watching the two swimmers and keeping pace. "Captain Balfix, we can't go to either that shore or the other one, or we'll be parboiled or eaten," Scotti whispered. "Try to even your kicking and your strokes. Breathe like you would normally. If you're feeling tired, tell me, and we'll float on our backs for a while." Anyone who has had the experience of giving rational advice to a drunkard would understand the hopelessness. Scotti kept pace with the captain, slowing himself, quickening, drifting left and right, while the Bosmer moaned old ditties from his pirate days. When he wasn't watching his companion, he watched the cats on the shore. After a stretch, he turned to his right. Another village had caught fire. Undoubtedly it was Grenis. Scotti stared at the blazing fury, awed by the sight of the destruction, and did not hear that the captain had ceased to sing. When he turned back, Captain Balfix was gone. Scotti dove into the murky depths of the river over and over again. There was nothing to be done. When he surfaced after his final search, he saw that the giant cats had moved on, perhaps assuming that he too had drowned. He continued his lonely swim downriver. A tributary, he noted, had formed a final barrier, keeping the flames from spreading further. But there were no more towns. After several hours, he began to ponder the wisdom of going ashore. Which shore was the question. He was spared the decision. Ahead of him was a rocky island with a bonfire. He did not know if he was intruding on a party of Bosmeri or Khajiiti, only that he could swim no more. With straining, aching muscles, he pulled himself onto the rocks. They were Bosmer refugees, he gathered, even though before they told him. Roasting over the fire was the remains of one of the giant cats that had been stalking him through the jungle on the opposite shore. "Senshi tiger," said one of the young warriors ravenously. "It's no animal. It's as smart as any Cathay Rod or Ohms or any other bleeding Khajiit. Pity this one drowned. I would have gladly killed it. You'll like the meat, though, sweet from all the sugar these asses eat." Scotti did not know if he was capable of eating a creature as intelligent as a man or mer, but he surprised himself as he had done several times over the last days. It was rich, succulent, and sweet like sugared pork, but no seasonings had been added. He surveyed the crowd as he ate. A sad lot, some still weeping for lost family members. There were the survivors of both the villages of Grenos and Athay, and war was on every person's lips. Why had the Khajiit attacked again? Why, specifically directed at Scotti as a Cyrodiil? Why was the Emperor not enforcing peace in his provinces? I was to meet another Cyrodiil, he said to a Bosmer maiden, who we understood to be from Athay. His name was Leiades Eurus. I don't suppose you might know what have happened to him. I don't know your friend, but there were many Cyrodiils in Athay when the fire came, said the girl. Some of them, I think, left quickly. They were going to Vindizi inland in the jungle. I am going there tomorrow. So are many of us. If you wish, you may come as well. Decumus Scotti nodded solemnly. He made himself as comfortable as he could in the stony ground of the river island, and somehow, after much effort, he fell asleep. But he did not sleep well. I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you for listening, and apologies for any mistakes or repeats that I did. There will be a couple cuts, but I'm leaving this as unedited as possible to keep it relaxing. I hope you all sleep well and have a wonderful night, and I will see you all in the near future with the rest of the series.